Sup, fucker?
How the hell are ya?
How goes it?
Oh, pretty good, dude. Dave just brought me, he just 3D printed my character for D&D, Brown Canis, and it's fucking super dope. Thank you, sir, again, for
I got you, fam.
token of love and honor. No, it's really cool. I can't wait to fucking paint him.
I know it. I was actually surprised at how well it turned out. Yeah, and it's a very cool design. Big armored brute dude. I'm glad I didn't break his horns off. Yeah.
Oh, broken horn might look cool too. Like one broken horn.
Oh, yeah. We'll have to wait for, like, after the first battle with Strahd.
Yeah.
Where we're guaranteed to lose. And then, battle damage everything.
Yeah. I'll have to take a picture and post it on the Dave-inci's Code page there.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking sweet.
Yeah.
So today, we're going to talk about life after death and reincarnation.
Life after death and reincarnation. I like it.
Have you ever been reincarnated?
Not that I can remember, but not everybody can remember their past lives. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe
It's possible.
it's possible.
I think I've told you this story before. I actually think I've told it on another episode where when I was like 17, I was having dreams about storming the beach in Normandy.
Really?
Yeah. It was like 2 or 3 times. Very vivid and like very visceral. One of those like super lucid dreams. And up until this point, I had like no exposure to anything World War II related. Like I hadn't even seen Saving Private Ryan or anything like that. But yeah, I had these dreams for a couple of weeks, and I remember like being on the boat, as they would drop the tailgate and you'd storm the beach, and I remember vividly running off of there and running to those big like jack looking things, and in the last dream it just like went black and I woke up and I never had another dream like that ever again. And then probably 6 or 7 years later, I watched the movie Saving Private Ryan for the first time, and it was exactly like that. And then I was like, shit, maybe I was like a GI in World War II and I had died and was reincarnated.
Possibly.
Very possible.
Yeah.
And I don't care how crazy that makes me sound. It happened.
Yeah, I don't think it sounds crazy. I mean, there's got to be a reason for. I mean, especially if you've never had any kind of like influence in seeing something like that. And I know that there was like a few video games that came out around that time that were kind of like that. But I think that came out after Saving Private Ryan did. Like, what were those games called?
Medal of Honor.
Medal of Honor, yeah.
Yeah. And Saving Private Ryan came out in like 97 or 98, somewhere around there. And those games didn't start coming out till a little bit later.
Yeah.
Because I remember I had played one of them well after the fact, when I was probably like 19 or 20. And at the time I thought it was so stupid. Like, why does this game take place in like an old war? Why aren't we doing like new wars with M16s and shit?
Yeah.
Now it's, as most, white men approach middle age, they get obsessed with World War II.
Yeah.
Which is so strange. But yeah, now I look back and go, that game was probably really awesome and I didn't give it its due diligence.
Yeah. I actually was like thinking about trying to fucking find that game on like one of the systems now. Might have a little bit better like gameplay or something.
Dude, you need an emulator.
Yeah.
One of those. You get every game you want. Did you ever play Call of Duty World at War?
Yeah.
That game was awesome.
That game was fun. Actually, I still have it upstairs on fucking PlayStation 3.
Yeah, like That game actually caught a lot of the World War II, like, violence and the action of it. You know, there's one map or one mission in the campaign where you go up to, like, the big concrete bunkers and you just stick your flamethrower in there and just blast. And you hear everybody, ah!
Yeah.
You're like, I may be slightly sociopathic.
Well, that's what you've seen. That's what you've seen in the movies, I guess, and it's like a very visceral thing, just to like, I don't know. You don't even see people, but you know you're fucking killing them inside there, just cooking them. I mean, if I was in that actual situation, that would be the most practical thing to do, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna risk my own fucking life running inside the bunker. Like,
fuck no.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, like, I'm gonna stand outside and cook off a couple grenades and chuck them in there.
Yeah.
And just keep chucking them until nobody else is screaming.
Yeah. But yeah, to have those dreams like that when you haven't had any kind of outside influence on, you know, seeing or witnessing stuff like that through like a movie or a video game, I think that it's really interesting to have those specific like details in a dream.
Yeah.
Without having any prior knowledge to, you know, visuals to seeing that stuff.
Well, what I find most funny about it is that was, 21 years ago when I was having those dreams, and I can still recall them very vividly.
Yeah.
Which is just bananas.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that they talk about like life after death and reincarnation or whatever, you can't really... There are no real scientific studies about like what happens after you die to prove one way or another if you still exist, or So what they have to go off of are a lot of tales or people's recounts of like near-death experiences, or NDEs as they call them. But a lot of the people that have these near-death experiences talk about how what they experienced in those moments were more hyper-real than actual real life. Mm-hmm. And unlike a dream, where a lot of times your dreams you forget about really quickly after, or the details of your dream kind of start to fade away pretty quickly after you have a dream. So like, you wake up from a dream and you're like, oh, that was so crazy, I was doing this, and that, and then by the end of the day, you can't remember what your dream was about. Yeah,
more often than not, it's like by the time you're done brushing your teeth in the morning, it's gone.
Right. But these people that have these near-death experiences have the total opposite recollection of their time being dead, and have like 100% recall on them. Total recall. On them, and they say that it's more, their experience was more real than actual reality is real. It seemed more real. So yeah, I mean, a dream like that being super realistic to you and still to this day super memorable and stuff, I think that it's probably...
Well, I definitely think there's more to it than it just being a dream.
Yeah.
And obviously I don't know enough to be able to pinpoint it, but that's definitely the easiest and I'll say most rational explanation for it, was just a past life regression.
Yeah.
And I'm inclined to think more people have them than not. We just probably don't recognize it. And I definitely think because I dreamt about it more than once that it became so memorable, versus if you have one dream that was potentially a past life regression, you would just, brush it off as just a dream.
Yeah.
But having multiple, shows kind of like a series instead of just, a pilot episode.
Yeah.
So, another thing about near-death experience or after-death or back-from-death experience, they talk about terminal lucidity. Have you heard about that?
Yeah.
I think that's so crazy because, terminal lucidity is when somebody has a very near-death experience and then they seem to make an almost complete and rapid recovery, and then shortly after they die.
Mm-hmm.
But in the time they have made that recovery period, they seem elated, very spiritual, very just like happy, what have you, and then just at random almost they die. And that time frame varies from like hours to days to months.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to a case about one lady. She had like got into a car accident. She went into cardiac arrest and they totally revived her, and she was like in a coma for a few days, and then she just randomly woke up fully cognizant, fully aware. Her body was functioning correctly. So they released her from the hospital. She got out, and she, for the next few months, was just like, everything is wonderful and what have you, and then just died in her sleep at random, like 3 months later. And this happens so often that it's actually studied enough that it has a term for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's crazy. It's almost like maybe you know that what's waiting for you on the other side is going to be peaceful and enjoyable and whatever. So it's almost like you have a last chance to say goodbye or leave on a high note or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's always like there's so many questions that I have with it. But I would think if I was going to go, that's what I would want.
Yeah.
Have a near-death experience, make a quick recovery, have a little bit of time left where you can just enjoy your last few breaths or whatever, and then just go peacefully.
Yeah. And also just to get the experience of like living worry-free and just with the understanding of especially after you've had like a near-death or NDE, having the knowledge in your own mind that everything's going to be okay. So like most of the shit that we stress about and worry about here in our lives in the long run doesn't really fucking matter. Like,
yeah.
Like I was listening to another lady's story that so she had she was talking about how like her husband had died, and she got like super depressed, and for like 2 years after was really depressed and was kind of praying that either God will let her heal from being depressed or just let her die,
mm-hmm.
whatever. And so 2 years later, she finds out she's got cancer, and she's got stage 2 cancer. She didn't specify what kind of cancer that she had, but so she's like, "Oh, great, yeah, I guess this is it. Like, I'm just gonna die, whatever."
Mm-hmm.
So reluctantly, she goes to the hospital and has surgery to have some of the cancer removed from her body. And something happened during the surgery that the doctors didn't know about, and she started bleeding internally. So she got done with the surgery, and they sent her home, and she was bleeding internally still, and she didn't know it. So then she goes like home, starts feeling kind of weird, like takes a shower, and then notices she's got blood coming out of her orifices. So she's like, "Oh, this isn't normal. It's probably not good." And but she was like contemplating, like, well, I guess this is it. This is my chance to just, let this happen. I'm gonna bleed out. I'm gonna lose all. I'll just die. And then she's like, well, all these people have fought to keep me alive during cancer, and been there supporting me through my depression, and
mm-hmm.
so she goes back to the hospital, and as she's laying on the table, she ends up bleeding to death internally and dies. And so she goes to this place, and she says she's in this place for what seems to her, if she had to time it out, she says she's in this place for like 10 years, dead. She realizes that she's dead. There's people, even though she can't see these people, but there are beings with her that are like talking to her. Both she's talking to them audibly, like speaking, and they're talking to her like through her mind, telepathically. And so she finally realizes where she's at. It's like a misty place, and it's like white. Everything's white and it's misty, and she's like, "Oh, this must be heaven." But she realizes there's a door kind of across this long hallway or room. There's a door on the other side, and so she starts moving towards the door, and there's like this white mist that's surrounding her, and so she asks the entities, what is this mist? What is the, I feel like I should be able to see each little tiny particle of mist because I have a spiritual sense. I should be able to sense what this is. And the spirits tell her that it's like, so when you're on Earth, your soul or your consciousness kind of gets corrupted by the earthly, like it's like dirt. Mm-hmm. Your soul or your consciousness is dirty, so walking through this mist is kind of cleansing you to be able to walk through the door and go on to heaven. And so she's like walking through this mist, and she gets to the door, and then she hears the voice talk to her again and says, "Okay, well, this is your time to decide. You can either open up the door and walk through it and you'll continue on to, where you're supposed to go, or you can not go through the door and you'll go back to living the rest of your life." And for some reason she chooses to go back, even though she feels like she's super, like, the most happy she's ever felt in this place, and like she just feels calm and peace and love, and like it's the most fulfilled she's ever felt. Mm-hmm. She still feels there's stuff that she needs to do in her life. So she comes back, and before she leaves, she said the entities tell her, "Well, you've come this far through this cleansing mist. When you get back to your normal life, you're going to be made whole." Mm-hmm. And so she doesn't really understand what that means, and then so she comes back, pops back to life, and she's been dead for like 15 minutes, like dead out. But in her mind, in this place, she was there for like 10 years. So she goes back to her body, like comes back to life, and like surprises all the doctors that have already pronounced her dead. So she's laying there and just comes back to life, and so they like start treating her and like bringing her back and pumping blood back into her body because she had bled out. And so she gets better. She goes home, and then she goes back. She finds another oncologist to continue her cancer research, and so they do like biopsies to find out where the cancer's at, and it turns out she doesn't have cancer anymore.
That's fucking bananas.
Yeah. So that was the whole thing with like making herself whole, or making her body whole.
So there's another very similar story. And do you know who Kevin Smith is?
The writer of...
Yeah, writer and director of like Clerks and Mallrats, and he plays Silent Bob.
Yeah.
So I used to listen to his podcast pretty religiously, and anytime he did like a guest spot, because he's very eloquent with his words, and like his stories are kind of drawn out, but he tells them so well that you're just like enthralled with it. And years ago, he had a heart attack, like a near fatal heart attack. He almost died. But his mom also had a heart attack, and she had died on the table, and they resuscitated her. And he tells her story of what she experienced while in the time that she was dead. And I can't remember how long she was like clinically dead, but her story was basically that while she was dead, she was laying in this big pool, and it was very dark, and the water was not see-through. The water was almost like black, but there was some source of light that she couldn't see. But when she was laying in this pool, she just felt ultimate peace and tranquility, and there was no more worry. It wasn't like complete elation, it was just like complete peace. And she had come back to life, after they resuscitated her, and she was almost mad, like she wanted to go back, which is a very common thing of these people who have after-death experiences or back from death, where they'll often withdraw or go into a deep depression afterward because they want to go back to that sense of peace and tranquility. But he had asked her, like, since you have died, are you afraid of death? And she says, no, I'm absolutely looking forward to it. And until I get there, I'm just going to live to the fullest with love and peace and care, and just be the best version of me I can be. And then when I'm gone, because I can't wait to feel that feeling again. She's like, nothing else mattered. I didn't think about my kids or my family. I didn't worry about bills or anything like that. It was just complete and absolute utter peace. And that seems to be like one of the big underlying factors. Now, one doctor broke it down. I didn't write down his name, but he put it down as 7 categories for near-death experiences. Some people, I should rephrase that. People see different things, but generally it's under these 7 categories. One is you'll see animals in nature. Another one is you'll see a bright light or a tunnel of light. You'll experience extreme deja vu, as though you're actually reliving moments of your life. Some people feel extreme fear, as though they're just sitting in just a blank room and they're just terrified. Some people see violence and persecution, which I almost theorize it's because they're shitty people, and they're forced to pay their karma. Some people see family, and other people recall post-cardiac arrest events, which is to say people who go into cardiac arrest and they're clinically dead, where they oftentimes levitate out of their body and they can see an overhead view of their body, or it's almost like they are conscious and they can see who's working on them, who's doing what to their body and what have you, and they can recall these events more often than not up to 3 minutes. So when you go into cardiac arrest, your brain function stops. Mm-hmm. And most scientists believe that brain functions stop entirely within 30 seconds of cardiac arrest, because you're not pumping blood or oxygen into your brain. But some of these people can recall these events 2.5 to 3 minutes afterward, even though their brain is showing no activity. And then some of these people, they're dead for certain amounts of time and then just randomly come back. I was watching this story. This one lady went into cardiac arrest. She was pronounced dead and woke up 17 hours later in the morgue. Just randomly was just like, what the fuck am I doing in an ice box?
Yeah.
And when she came back, she like made a full recovery and didn't have that terminal lucidity. She lived for years afterwards.
Yeah.
And I always think that's the most interesting thing, is these people who die but don't have these big wonderful experiences like a lot of people say, where, you know, they were in that pool or they went to this misty place or they floated through the cosmos or whatever. Because like, if you watch these stories, especially because I watched this one on YouTube, I wrote it down. It's called, the channel is called Coming Home, and it's all about after-death experiences and people who came back. And their experiences are so wildly different from one person to the next. Some of them overlap, but for the most part, it almost seems like a tailored experience.
Yeah.
But I'm way more fascinated with the ones that like almost astral project out of their body, and they can see everything and recall these physical experiences that they're having without being in their body.
Yeah. Just as kind of proof that they were really there, and they can, you know, it almost shows proof of, you know, their experience was real.
Well, there was one guy who had this experience, and the nurse, one of the nurses in the room, like, who was tending to him afterwards when he was in recovery, and he woke up and he was like telling her, you know, I left my body. I was watching everything in the room while you guys were working on me. She's like, that's impossible. You were dead. And then when you weren't dead, you were unconscious. There's no way you could have seen our faces or anything like that. And he goes, okay, well, I could describe things for you. And so he describes all these things, and she's still kind of skeptical. And then she's like, okay, there was an object sitting on the windowsill. What was it? And he describes it in perfect detail. So I do think it is like proof. Obviously, you didn't see the person sit up and open their eyes.
Yeah.
And even if they did, it would only have been momentarily. They're not going to be able to recall every detail in the room and all the people. Like, most people don't have eidetic memory. They can't do that. But this guy could. And he was dead for 4 minutes or something like that.
Yeah. So there was one story of a lady that when she died, she like blinked and then opened her eyes, and she was in the back seat of her sister's car, and her sister was like driving through the rain and was like frantic, and she was like, yeah, I remember I was in the back seat with her trying to talk to her, but she couldn't hear me, and I could see what she was wearing, and I saw her pull out her phone and send a text message, and I could see what it said on the text message.
Mm-hmm.
And then so like after like a week after the lady wakes up or comes back to life and was, recovering, she was talking to her sister and said that, I saw what you were wearing, described to her what she was wearing, and then told her what she had texted, and then so she pulled out her phone and looked at exactly what she had texted, and it was like, hold on, I'm coming. But it was like, how would she know about that? Like,
yeah.
So it's a lot of weird things, that I don't see how somebody could just guess stuff like that. There are actually, some people on there that, we're talking about people that have good experiences and positive experiences. There are people that do have, like, super negative experiences and pretty much talk about how they go to hell and somehow come back. There's one guy that on there that talks about how, like, he's in this hospital in Paris, and he's trying to communicate with the doctors, and he ends up dying, and he doesn't know that he's dead, and he's like trying to yell at the doctors, and nobody's listening to him, and he's like yelling at his wife, and he's like, well, one thing that she would always do when she was mad at me was she would ignore me, and so I thought that she was ignoring me again, and so I was like walking around yelling at her, why is she mad at me, and quit ignoring me. And so he's like, he finally went out into the hallway to try to find a doctor that'll listen to him. And as he steps out into the hallway, he sees these two shadowy figures that tell him that he has to come with them. And so in his mind, he's thinking these doctors are really dressed funny. So he starts following them, and then all of a sudden everything goes black, and then he's just surrounded by demons that just start attacking him physically and, like, pretty much like raping him and biting him and just tearing him apart, like, bit by bit, and just totally just hell, pretty much.
Yeah.
Until he finally makes it back somehow.
I read a book years ago. I'm talking like I was in my early 20s when I read it. Another guy recounted the very same thing. He essentially got into a car wreck, and he died in the car, and the paramedics had resuscitated him, but while he was dead in the car, he was in hell. And basically described the same thing. And like, all the demons weren't like your traditional biblical looking demons. They were often like misshapen bodies, like big blocky torsos and skinny legs, and just all around weird looking. And they did all the same shit to him, tortured him, raped him, pulled him apart piece by piece, put him back together just so they could keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And basically what he took away from it was, he's like, after that I lived a good life, I did everything by the book, and I went to church and all this other shit. And it's like, that part of you has to wonder why so many people get these great, beautiful, positive experiences, and why certain people get the shaft on it. And you kind of go, what did you actually do in life? Yeah. Like, do you have some secrets?
That's what he came back and said, and he was like, I had realized, after he came back, that he lived his whole life, he was a shitty person. He was like, I admittedly was a terrible husband, a terrible father, a terrible all my aspirations in life were to gain more power and more money, and I wanted to be the best and show everybody that I was the best and make everybody know that I was the best, and I didn't care what they thought or what they felt. And he's like, now it's like I know that the way that I treat people reflects both on myself and on them. So I have to treat people the way that I would like to be treated, and show love and compassion to people outwardly and in the front, of everything that I do. And so he's like, it changed his whole life and his whole perspective on how he had been living his whole life. It was really, really great. And there was another lady that also had an after-death experience, and talking to the entities where she went, the beings, they relayed to her how, so she was a nurse. She was actually a nurse, and then she died. And then, so she knew all the things that were happening to her in a medical sense. And so she was trying to rationalize how everything's, what's happening is there's chemicals in your brain that are released when you're dying, and I'm just having this experience from this. And so these beings were telling her, verifying, no, this is really happening, and kind of explained to her the way that energy doesn't dissipate, it just transfers. And they were like, humans think of good and bad as pretty, something's good or something bad.
Yeah.
When really anything can be good as long as you have if you have positive momentum towards a goal, or stagnation is bad.
Yeah.
But they're like, anything you put out, any kind of energy you put out towards something, whether it's good or bad, that's really what matters. So they're like, if you have even just ill thoughts about somebody, like you have bad thoughts about somebody at work or somebody that that negative energy attaches to that other person, and it's kind of like a negative, just like a magnetic negative energy force between you two, and that'll attract more negativity and more negativity and more negativity, just like we were talking about in the demonic possession episode. But it can be broken by apologizing, and so it can, if you have ill will towards somebody and you kind of make amends and start building that relationship, you can definitely turn that energy to positive energy, and start attracting more positive. And so it's really, when the time that you die, how much negative and how much positive you have really has an impact on what happens to you and what you experience after.
Well, I'm fucked. I don't actually have negative energy or ill will towards people. I've just learned just to cut certain people off.
Yeah.
And just
well, I think that's fair though, because you also have to take into account what their energy is doing to you, to your energy, and if it's their energy is just dragging you to a negative spot, I think it's best just to kind of...
I think so too. Just distance yourself from people who, even if they're not bad people and they just fucking irritate you, that's still negative energy.
Yeah.
So I've learned to not feed that part of myself, because it's so easy, and just distance myself from those people. And even though it could be just totally me and I'm just being, a prick about it, but not all two people are going to, mesh super well. It's just reality. But not that I have any, ill will towards those people, aside from, the minor thing of, I hope you cut a fingernail too short, or I hope you step on a Lego kind of thing.
Yeah.
But just once.
No, yeah, I mean, and I'm bad. I talk shit. I mostly talk shit to people. And most of the stuff that I say to that person. But most of it's in fucking fun. And
yeah, it's jest.
Yeah.
It's I don't hate you.
I don't really hate people. It's too much energy to hate somebody.
Right? hating people just takes way too much power away from yourself.
Yeah.
And I'd rather spend that on me,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So one thing I find interesting about the life after death thing is also kind of going back to the terminal lucidity, is that the people, when they're in that kind of elated state, they tend to see or experience something like religious or theological in nature. Like if you're a Christian, people tend to see Jesus, or if you're, I can't remember what they fucking called them in Muslim cultures, the ferrymen who basically put you in a cart to take you to the other side, or the Greeks would see the ferryman of Charon or whatever, and it all seems to, like I said, be tailor-made to that person. You know, if you're, like I said, if you're raised Christian, you're going to see Jesus or whatever. And I find that super interesting, and it really does make me believe that there's no like one-size-fits-all death for everybody. It really is down to you, you know, where, like, if I die, I'm going to see like a big keg of cold beer or something like that, you know, or you're going to see like a bunch of women in bikinis or what have you. And I find that prospect super interesting, because what better way to kind of ferry you into the afterlife than something that you find extremely prevalent in your own life,
Yeah.
especially for the super religious who devoutly believe in God or Jesus or you know, Buddha, Allah, whatever it is, that's what you're going to experience, because it's going to make sense to the mind that you've created and cultured over your life,
Yeah.
in believing that these things are what the afterlife is supposed to be. So in a way, if you're good, you get rewarded with that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool, because then it just justifies everybody's bullshit.
Yeah. So yeah, there was another lady that had told her story, and in her experience, she found herself in this garden, and she said it was a beautiful garden, and all of a sudden her grandfather was with her and talking to her, and, you know, they were having a conversation, and so he was like, you can ask me whatever you want to ask me. And so she was, but in her time while she was sitting there, she's in this garden on this bench, but she's noticing all these other people that are just walking around, walking by, looking at stuff, and knows in her mind, and she knows that what those people are seeing and experiencing is nothing like what she's seeing and experiencing. She's like, I know these are other people, that are other spirits that are, you know, here and finding this information out as they're dying, and but I knew that they weren't seeing the same thing that I was seeing. They might have been seeing, like, you know, a mountain or like a stream, or, you know, whatever it was. That's what she was saying, was like, I knew in my heart that it was all tailored to what their experience on, or what their belief system, or what their own mind had made for their vision of heaven, or, you know, of this afterlife. And so, really interesting.
What would your vision of heaven be?
I would think it looks a lot like Glacier National Park. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's really beautiful, like just serene.
Have I been there? Where's it at?
It's up in Montana.
Oh, no, I
It's
haven't.
like the bordering Montana and Canada. It's just gorgeous. I don't know, maybe just like family and friends.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think it would, I think mine would be like, I don't know, kind of cut in thirds, because you kind of get the family and friends aspect, and then another third would just be like peace and fucking quiet. Just like in a dark room with no sound.
Yeah.
And then probably another third would be all the selfish shit that I like to do.
It's like some like airsoft game with your whole family that's super into it, but like no noise.
Yeah. And I always win.
You're untouchable.
My ego can only take so much. Yeah. Another thing with the life and death thing is that I found interesting, and I only found a handful of these stories where people would have dreams about a loved one. And this one sticks out in particular where this woman was dead ass asleep, and she woke up and something was like calling her to go to her window. She goes to the window, opens the window, and sees these like speckles of light in a fog. And then she heard her mother's voice, and her mother was like, "Everything's going to be okay. I love you. Don't worry. I'm okay." And then she had woke up realizing that she was in a dream. And then like 2 hours later, her sister called and said, "Mom's gone." Where there's a lot of these, well, not a lot, but I only found a few, but I know there's a lot. There's been billions of people alive. I'm sure many people have experienced it. Where people will have these dreams where they, in a way, communicate with a loved one who has passed. So that story didn't like confirm if the mom had died while she was asleep or if she died after or whatever, but I think it's safe to assume she probably died and went to her daughter while she was asleep to say that, to give a last message and move on. But I think that's so cool, and like it would be cool if we had like maintainable power over that, so yeah. It would kind of assuage grief for a lot of people to be like, "Oh, I heard from my Uncle Joe, and he's like, hey, I'm cool, don't worry about it, don't be sad," and then you find out that he's gone, and you're like, "Hey, he told me not to be sad." When's the will reading, by the way?
Yeah. Yeah, there was another thing that I found interesting was like some of the studies that they've done on brain activity and stuff like that after you pass away. And, there's been studies on like the 21 grams.
I was just about to bring that up. Although a lot of scientists really discredit it, and it does make sense because your body loses moisture, mm-hmm. and your body goes into like a high temp, so you sweat. So 21 grams of sweat is not a lot. Plus mm-hmm. you're losing air inside your lungs and things like that. So scientifically, I could understand it being debunked, but at the same time, what if it's true? And that's kind of the way I look at all of it. Is like you can't really pick one side or the other.
Yeah. So along with that, there was another study that this doctor did, and so he put out that he was trying to do this study on people that were dying, and so he got responses from like a number of people's families that they had their patients or their family members were in comas, and they were talking about, and they were planning on like pulling the plug. Mm-hmm. So they were going to take them off life support and let them die. So he sets up this study to monitor brain activity as the patient is dying. So he hooks them up to all these electrodes and stuff that reads their brain function. So like the whole time during the coma, their brain function is like baseline, like nothing's really going on. You take them off life support, and still it's the same. Nothing's happening. Body dies, and heart stops. So brain activity should cease. And he said on almost every single one of the patients that he did this study on, about 10 to 15 minutes after the person is pronounced dead, the brain activity spikes. Mm. And so he's tracing all the brain activity that's happening, and it's in the areas where your conversations, like in-depth conversations, are happening in your brain, and physical activity. So in his mind, he's saying these people that are going and having these NDEs or after death experiences are actually experiencing, where they're walking around talking to somebody. They're actually experiencing these things, and the brain is showing this, that it's actually happening. But then there's other doctors that are talking about how when you die, there are chemicals that release in your brain, adrenaline and or DMT, that kind of like puts you into this state of euphoria and having like a psychedelic experience. But in his mind, he thinks that it's really, that is just a lubrication for the separation of spirit and body. So like it's just a door that's opening for the transition between like physical and metaphysical realm for your spirit to depart your body.
Yeah. You know, I think it's hilarious the way all these podcasts end up coming around to psychedelics.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Blue Chew. We got to mention Blue Chew.
They should make a psychedelic Blue Chew.
Dude, I think Preston made a pretty slick comment about that. No, the way DMT is, and I've never personally tried it, but I'd be 1,000% down, where people talk about the spiritual aspect of it and how they can kind of relate it to a lot of life and death stuff and just that heavy spirituality that goes with it. And I really do think that psychedelics themselves have a direct link to life and death. And while I was kind of researching this episode and listening to people's after-death experiences, or they're back from death, whichever, and I was thinking, like, what's my closest experience to that? Because I've never, had like a near-death experience or cardiac arrest or anything like that. And the only thing I could think of was taking a big dosage of mushrooms one time. And after the majority of it passed, you go through like your ego death and the visions and getting the gigs really bad and all that. When you're in that totally relaxed point where you're at peace and you're kind of like, I'm ready to be shown whatever, whatever whomever will show me. And I got into that point and I remember like floating up into the sky, not like lifted or pulled or carried. I just felt like weightless, like floating up, and something's calling me to come up and talk to it. And it wasn't like a voice, it was more of a feeling than anything. And I just remember that feeling, and that was the best part of the whole trip, was just completely weightless. I almost felt like a balloon full of helium, just slowly floating up, not thinking about anything, not worried about anything. The only thing I was pursuant of was finding what it is that was like beckoning me to come talk to it. And then right after that, it was like an instant come down. And I hated it because I was like, what was up there? But just comparing it to the notes of what other people have talked about, that's got to be really close, if not a direct parallel. And if you look at like Norse mythology, they talk about the tree of Yggdrasil. I always pronounce that wrong. Where they believe that you will die and be reincarnated over and over until essentially your spirit or your soul reaches a level of ascension, and then you can join the tree, and the tree is like a collective consciousness. And even in the Tibetan Book of the Dead says the same thing. You're going to die and reincarnate until you reach a place of nirvana, and when you're done, you will basically join the collective. Because you're no longer selfish. You don't think about yourself. You don't think about being on earth or worldly interest anymore, because you finally just reach that place where you let go and you're not tethered to anything anymore, and you're finally at peace as a person, as a soul. You're at peace, and then you can become part of everything all at once, which is kind of what they describe nirvana as. And then if you tie that back around to mushrooms, there is kind of a prevailing theory that mushrooms are psychedelics in general because they're all kind of based on the same plants in a way. This is more of a chewy topic, but it is almost believed that it's based on a collective consciousness.
Yeah.
And I could wax poetic on that all day, but again, I'm going to leave that one to Chewy. He knows way more about it than I'll ever know. But I like the idea that psychedelics are a way for you to get into that slipstream between life and death, between conscious and unconscious, and basically like break the tethers of one side or the other to where everything is infinite, everything is available.
Yeah.
And you've done them, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where you just feel completely
tapped into the
you're tapped in, you're unlocked, there's no tether, there's nothing tying you to anything. You can go anywhere or be anywhere or see anything at any given time.
Well, it's also just the feeling of being connected to everything that's around you.
It is both ends at the same time.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I definitely believe that also, like talking about reincarnation and reliving multiple lives to try to, there's certain things that you learn about yourself and whether you can remember those things or not, or if it's just a retry on getting things right or trying to get, life correct, where you're a person that can let go of, like, wanting to be the best and brightest and, have the coolest shit.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's, especially nowadays where everybody focuses on having the latest phone and, the coolest sneakers and shit like that. I mean, I love fucking shoes, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like,
well, and even with that aspect, I think there is a level of ascension emotionally or even mentally that comes with, like you say, you like shoes. You're not buying shoes to impress the kids at school or to like show up your coworkers because they got these $200 Jordans and you got $300 Jordans. You do it because you like those things. They make you feel good or they add a sense of value to your life. I think that in and of itself is some kind of ascension because you're not buying them for any other purpose than yourself.
Yeah.
And that shows a lot because you brought up phones, it's such an easy like allegory of people who come to work and be like, dude, I got this brand new Galaxy 85 or whatever the fuck they're at now. Check this out. It does all this. Like, cool. It's still a phone, bro.
Does it make phone calls?
Yeah. And it's like that material things only matter if they serve a purpose for you.
Yeah.
And so even if, you go to the store and you see a nice shirt and the shirt's like $25 and you're like, it's $25. I shouldn't buy it. But you buy it anyway. And you're like, I'm glad I did. I feel like I'm comfortable in the shirt. It looks good on me. It makes me feel good about myself. That matters. Not trying to show up anybody or show off to anybody or like try to make yourself the center of attention. You just do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Enlightenment.
You know what's funny about that Tibetan Book of the Dead? And I came across this and I found it pretty entertaining. So the guy who wrote it, he didn't actually write it. He basically like had this princess create a transcript of it for him. I don't know if he couldn't read or write or whatever it was. Maybe they had to carve it in stone. I didn't look that deeply into it. But he had her write it because he felt she was the only person he had ever known that reached actual nirvana in her life, so she was the best suited to write it. But he also felt it was way too ahead of his own time. So he hid this book, and he prophesied that it wouldn't be found for 500 years. Now, he wrote it in the 8th century, and it was found in the 17th century, 500 years later. But it talks about all the same thing, where it is a circle of birth, death, and rebirth, achieving nirvana, and you'll repeat the cycle until you reach nirvana. So it is kind of entertaining that all these different theologies have the same premise.
Yeah.
I don't know how it is with like Christianity or Catholicism, but I imagine it's the same. I find it hard to believe that your life, your consciousness, your person is a one and done. You're going to live, pay bills, and you're going to fucking die, and then you're going to go up or down. That sounds so silly to me. Like, what's the purpose?
Yeah. I would hope and imagine that, you get to the judgment seat or whatever it is, and they're like, yeah, you failed miserably. Go suck dicks in hell. Or they're like, we're going to give you a retry. Go back down there and try it again. Respawn.
Yeah. Respawn. I hope you lay down your tack insert, or you're going to end up in the body of a little Filipino girl or something.
Yeah. You need to get the magic mushrooms to get more lives.
Fucking mushrooms, psychedelics in general, I do recommend everybody try it at least once.
Yeah, fucking Mario does them all the time.
Does he really? Oh, you're talking about Mario the
Super
game
Mario.
character. I was talking about Mario at work.
Oh, no.
I was like, I would have never guessed that.
Maybe, I don't know.
I doubt it.
I doubt it.
Yeah, how do you think he grows big?
Yeah.
Then he eats a flower, suddenly he can spit fireballs? Like, the math is checking out.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of a song from Godsmack called The Spiral?
I don't know.
It's literally about reincarnation. Let me see. It goes, fuck. Why am I suddenly drawing a blank? Every time I hear the word reincarnation, I think about this Godsmack concert I went to, and they went to play that song, and they're from Boston, and the singer's like, the song is about reincarnation. So I can't think about the word reincarnation without hearing it with that accent. Reincarnation. Is this not the greatest actor who ever lived, Mark Hamill? Yeah, the chorus goes, rot away, live again, here forever, the spiral never ends. Where I think the point that he was missing in that song was eventually, you don't have to be here forever, if I had to guess anyway. Really cool song, very like tribal, kind of dark, moody. But the aspect of reincarnation itself is so fascinating to me because of all the different stories I've heard over the years of all these kids, mainly between the ages of 2 and 5, who are able to recall these lives and these details of other people's lives that they would have no concept of. You're talking about kids who can't tie their fucking shoe but can recall intimate details of another person's life.
Yeah, I was listening to a story about a kid that would always talk about, like, and then he started actually saying how he was like he made motion pictures.
Martin?
Yeah.
Martin, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell it anyway.
So he's like talking about how he knew famous people and he'd gone to vacations in Paris with these people and how he missed his old house and like friends that he knew. And he ends up, like, he was like obsessed with like old Hollywood memorabilia stuff, and then one day he's looking through this book that his parents got him, and then he recognizes somebody in the book, and he's like, oh, that's me. And so they start doing this, like the parents start kind of looking into it, and like all the people that the kid had said that he had known were people that this guy had worked with on movies and gone on vacations with and stuff like that. The house, he remembered the house, what street it was on, all these crazy details about this. He was a director, a producer, a movie producer back in like the 30s or something.
Yeah.
And just knew all these super intimate details that a kid wouldn't know, shouldn't know.
Especially a kid of that age.
Yeah, and he was like, starting from the time he was like 2, right? 2 or 3. And up until he was like 8 or 9, when he was just, always obsessed about talking about this person that he knew, or he had been. But yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. A couple of the other details about that story was, one, he recalled having 3 sons. And when he was flipping through that book, he pointed them out, and he's like, those are my 3 sons. And the parents arranged, like, once they figured out who the kid thought he was, which was Martin, that they arranged to meet with the surviving family of Martin, and would basically, like, have the family sit down with the kid, and the kid would divulge all these different details, and the family confirmed everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was so fucking cool. And it was like after that, when he was in that like 7, 8, 9 range, that he started to not remember it and let it go, which almost makes me think like Martin finally found peace. Like he was able to see, okay, my family's okay, everything's good, I can move on. Or it's just that the boy was starting to grow into his own life. You know, he's in that prepubescent stage. He's about to go through this big major change with his body and everything. That it was like, okay, I have to be me now. And like the one thing I hate about those stories, and I fucking hate this, is all these people who come out and try to discredit it, even though the story adds up, all the math checks out, and they're like, oh, it's just a family trying to get 15 minutes of fame. Like, is it? Or is it just this weird supernatural thing that people just don't give enough credence to?
Yeah.
Or there was another one of this, another young boy said that he was a woman and he died in a plane crash, and he could remember, or no, sorry, that's a different story. He was a young woman and he had lived down the street, so like every time his mom would take him for a walk, he'd say, that's where I died. And so he was giving all these different intimate details, and his mom started doing some research and realized the building that he's always pointing to, there was a fire there in the 70s, and a lady died there, and he had all the accurate descriptions. And so she tried to trick him, so she printed off a picture of the lady who died and slipped it into their photo album with like all their normal family pictures. And she's going through like, who's that? Oh, that's Papa. Who's that? Oh, that's Grandma. Who's that? Oh, that's you. Who's that? He goes, oh, that was me, and points to the picture of the gal who died in the fire. Like, you could trick kids into doing what you want, but when they do it in that fashion, where they have no prior knowledge and you're not coercing them or coaching them, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a point where, like, coincidences and guessing, after it starts adding up to so many, similarities, that it stops being a coincidence and
becomes a pattern.
Becomes, a pattern, or closer to a fact.
And I've talked to so many people, over my lifetime, and I think a lot of people feel it's very faux pas to talk about reincarnation or their own experience. But I have had a few people who I have talked to who have shared their experience with me, and never once have I been like, you're full of shit. I go, no, the way people talk about it and their inflection and like their emotional state when they talk about it tells you everything you need to know if they're lying or not.
Yeah.
Which, side note, if anybody wants to talk to me about their reincarnation, I'm totally game. But yeah, that's not a thing that I think most people go out of their way to get attention for. Because I think a lot of people feel like they're going to be treated like they're crazy or something. Like, even telling my story, I go, I know people are going to listen to that and go, that's horseshit or whatever. I don't really give a fuck. That's my story. It happened.
Yeah.
I don't care if you believe me or not.
Well, even a lot of these people that are having after-death experiences end up being examined or questioned and going through psychiatric treatment because the doctors think that they're crazy. That especially if they come out and say, oh, I was talking to God, or I was talking to Jesus, or whatever. Mm-hmm. I was talking to these entities. Okay, well, you're talking to God, you're crazy.
Yeah.
And so they'll end up going through, like, having a psych evaluation just to make sure they didn't suffer some kind of brain injury or, have some kind of psychosis now. But there are people that come out of these experiences also with enhanced abilities, like psychic abilities and things that they've seen in their time when they were dead and can kind of predict things that are happening. There's one lady that her story is that she was going to church, and she was with her 2 kids, and so she drops one of her kids off who was like 8 years old. It was raining, it was storming outside, and so she drops the older kid who's like 8 or 9 right by the door. So he jumps out of the car, runs over, and is waiting by the door. So she pulls over to the parking lot, drives over into a parking spot, reaches back, grabs the younger boy who's 2 years old, grabs her umbrella, and as she steps out of the car, she opens up the umbrella and starts walking, and she just hears this loud boom. And like she's looking around trying to figure out what happened, and looks down at her 2-year-old son, and he's like standing there holding his ears, and he's got like black marks on his head and his and she looks over at her other son, who starts running toward through the parking lot, and she's yelling at him to stay over there. And he runs over, grabs the younger kid, and runs back to the church and goes inside. So she follows him inside, and is like, and there's some guy that comes running up to them, is asking them questions, and she goes over and she's trying to talk to this guy, and she can't figure out why he's just ignoring her. And so she finally looks out into the parking lot and sees her body laying out there. She got struck by lightning.
Oh, jeez.
And so she realizes that she is probably dead, and then all of a sudden she goes into this other place. Anyways, she spends time kind of going with these entities, talking to these family members. She thought they were family members that were kind of guiding her through there and asking her if she wanted to stay or if she wanted to go back, and she said that she wanted to go back and take care of her kids. And so eventually she wakes back up, and she's in the parking lot, soaking wet, getting rained on. And a couple weeks later, after she's healed, and she had to spend a few months on bed rest because she got hit by fucking lightning.
Yeah.
She was kind of burnt up. So as she was kind of on bed rest, she was having these crazy dreams, and she was just having all these wild dreams, and she ends up having a dream about a plane crash. And she wakes up and talks to her husband, calls her mom, and says, "Yeah, I just had this crazy dream about a plane crash, and this is the number, it says the flight number and how many people were on the flight." And about a week later, flight 800 crashes into the ocean.
Oh,
same
shit.
number of people. But so she has written a book about all these dreams that she's had, and so she started emailing herself to have proof that she was, she'd wake up, email herself, so it had a date stamp on the email.
Yeah.
Of when she's having these dreams and stuff. And so many of them were coming true, all these things. And so basically in her mind she came back and she has these psychic abilities, but nobody really believes her.
Well, I mean, if you think of death as a doorway, where if you walk through it and then you walk back through it to go back the way you came, you could potentially leave it cracked. So maybe that little crack that's left open, there's something seeping back through,
Yeah.
That also is a Stephen King book, The Dead Zone.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. The main character died, and when he came back, he had premonitions of things. And so he was kind of like the equalizer for dead people. He would go around and try to stop these things from happening to people. Really cool premise. But to me, I have no doubt that is 100% true.
Yeah.
And the fact that she emailed him, so you had a digital timestamp, both on the send and the receive, and then these events happen afterward, that's pretty irrefutable.
Yeah. And she's written a book about it, and she got some notoriety from it, but like she was like a lot of them that happened didn't end up coming. I don't know if they came true or not. I'm just getting the ones that I know that have happened are like major news stories. So she's like, these other ones that I've had and I've emailed myself about, I don't know if they potentially happened somewhere and just wasn't reported, like, some far off country like India or something happens and
or alternate theory, the same thing happened to another person, just like in the book, who's going around stopping these events.
Yeah.
So they may have had the same vision, but one did something and the other one just like recorded it.
Yeah. Maybe.
It's hard for me to discredit anything supernatural in nature like that because there's no way to disprove it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes those subjects so fun to think about or even talk about, because theorizing about it is really cool, but at the end of the day, there's no way you can say one way or the other it happened.
Yeah.
So the mystery is really elusive.
Yeah. It's like some of these like ancient alien people talk about, like the lack of evidence doesn't prove that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
It's just the evidence just hasn't been found, but it's not going to be found if nobody's looking for it, really.
Yeah, there are many more studies going on with life after death now than there ever was, and we can always like attribute that to kind of Dark Ages mentality, where in the past when medical science was making huge advances, people were still very religious. So they would just chalk it up to God, the devil, heaven, and hell. It's that simple. Don't look into it any further. We need to figure out how to do blood transfusions instead. That's more important.
Yeah.
And I think nowadays where collective consciousness is very much more open to the idea of researching anything and everything, which is why we can have open conversations about aliens or life on other planets or what UAPs really are, where that sort of thing is in the news regularly. And it's not faux pas to talk about anymore, because it's just like, no, it's just time for us to start investigating these things. We're not tethered to old mentality of it's just God. That's all it is. Don't question it. And so researching life after death is being conducted on many different levels with many different scientists. And I think the one guy who's actually leading the front in that is Robert Bigelow.
Yeah.
And he's been researching that for like 30 years. And there's not a whole lot of information out there you can get a hold of on that. But when you listen to him talk about it, he's like, there's a lot of really compelling evidence that we're still working on to actually make it like viable and provable. But we've made leaps and bounds in terms of what we've found.
Yeah. I think he's actually dead now.
Bigelow? No way.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the guy was like 117 10 years ago, so...
2022 or 2023. But yeah, I think he's... If you're out there, Bigelow...
Hook us up, dude.
Yeah. But yeah, I know that he was like leading research in that area. I actually just saw, when I was looking at all the news clips for the other episode that we did the other day, how we just kind of like pick news articles or whatever's going on mainstream, whatever to talk about, just topics. There was an article talking about quantum physicists that are theorizing death doesn't exist, and how it is just a transfer of energy from the physical to the metaphysical, and your consciousness does just transition from one plane to another, I guess. But yeah, pretty interesting that they're actually mainstream like scientists that can actually figure some shit out, working on the problems that it seems like everybody has, a theory or a belief or a idea about what happens, but have people actually working on it in a scientific space, trying to figure out a way to test, for these possibilities, I think is really encouraging.
I think it is, and I'm probably going to catch some hate for saying this. I think when you donate to the Cancer Research Fund, I think a good chunk of that money should go to other, I'll call them fringe topics to study, because they've been studying how to cure cancer for like 100 years and haven't found shit. And they use the same treatment method, which tells me they're not actually studying.
Yeah.
Because everything else that gets studied, eventually a cure or like a prolonging medication gets found. A treatment, except for cancer, which is strange. Yeah, I do think it's something that we should look at more scientifically, with more minds and more funding and more, I should say, open-mindedness. Because you have to actually take into account things like religion and theology and the premise that there could be a God, or there could be nirvana, or a great tree, or something. Like, if you were to apply theology to science, you might be able to come up with a solution that's actually viable, instead of just going, yeah, we don't know.
Yeah. And the way I've always looked at it, it's like growing up, in a religious household, and then going to school and like learning about like science and the laws of science. It seems like they're two different things, but if you look at it, it's really just the same, two sides of the same coin. Like,
yeah.
They're talking about the same things, just from different angles that point to the same thing. So really, like, looking at it in a lens of they are connected should be a normal thing, or at least a way to not see a division between the two, and that's the way that I perceive it now, being older, and I don't want to say wiser, but like, I'm older for sure.
Well, there's a couple of lines from the movie Thor that I took away, and Thor is talking to Jane Foster about magic. And she's talking about science, and he said magic is just science that you don't understand yet.
Right.
Or one character says to Jane Foster, like, she quotes a science fiction writer, and he's like, yeah, he wrote science fiction. And she goes, that's a precursor to science fact. I mean, you think about all the things that 50, 60 years ago we thought as science fiction, like basically anything from Star Trek was science fiction.
Yeah.
Now it's science fact.
Yeah.
Now we have screens where we look at each other while we talk, and we're a vast distance away, where we have these small devices that we can communicate with our voice with a touch of a button.
Mm-hmm.
We pretty much everything that was in Star Trek exists now.
I think the real mindfuck is like in the Matrix, where she says, would you have broken the vase if I haven't told you about it? Same thing, like a lot of those things that have been on Star Trek, would we have those things now if it wasn't something that was put out into the social consciousness of a possibility back then?
That's a big question in my mind, with a lot of these topics that we talk about that are very theoretical, and even like one of the other episodes that's going to get done is the Simpsons future predictions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions I put on there was, do these predictions inform on society to make them happen? And that's the very same thing, where like you said with the Matrix quote, would you have broken the vase if I didn't tell you about it? Or was it predetermined to happen?
Yeah.
Or did I inform on you enough to draw attention to it that ended up making you break the vase?
Yeah.
It's such a weird conundrum. And the same thing applies to these people who die and get to that door and they have the option to go back or go forward. Is it predetermined to be, we know you're going to choose to go back, but we're going to show you this door anyway? If so, what's the purpose? Or is it actually free will that you get to choose to go through the door or to go back? And it's such a big conundrum. And there's no way you can even like theorize what you would choose if presented that same option.
Yeah.
So you have to assume it's either your actual free will in the moment, determinable by how you feel at that moment, or whatever big powerful force is out there knows what you're going to choose, but want to show you that you have a choice, which is illusion of free will.
Yeah.
Huge conundrum. I think about that way more than I should.
Keeps me up at night.
Yeah. Lay in bed, it's like 1 a.m. Like, oh, I gotta sleep. But is free will real, or is it the illusion of free will?
Do I really have the choice to go to sleep, or can I stay up?
But if I choose to stay up,
am I going to be fucked tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I not recently, but like, yeah, I used to just think in circles like that for hours and hours. Like, you know, now I'm just more so now I just accept that, like, whatever happens is meant to happen, and it's going to happen whether I want it to or not. And, you know, I can steer myself into a direction that I want to head, but whatever happens along the road, I don't know and can't really plan for. But it's going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, I've definitely, especially in the last, 2 years, have taken that kind of Alan Watts stance on everything. Just let go.
Yeah.
You don't have control over the wheel anyway. Stop thinking you do. Just let go.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is going to happen. It doesn't matter if it's predetermined. Doesn't matter if it's free will. It's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's structured or not, who knows? But, yeah. Don't bother trying to control what you can't control.
Yeah. And, like, even, like, when my dad passed away 2 years ago, I mourned and, was sad about it, but for the most part, it was like, well, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, sure, I'll see him sometime later,
Well, it's weird when big, traumatic, life-changing events happen, how everybody kind of has a different response or a different amount of time that they use to process that. And I myself, would hold on to things for way too long. Way longer than I should have. And you finally come to a point where you have to learn how to be at peace with things, no matter how good or bad they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of power in that. And there's a lot of power to be able to say, I had no control over anything. The only thing I can control is how I react to it.
Right.
And if I react to it with just a sense of I'm at peace with the situation, I don't hate. It's just, love and care and holding on to the good things and not dwelling on what coulda, woulda, shoulda kind of thing, and just let go as it is.
Yeah.
And it's hard and it sucks, but you have to do it.
Yeah. That, and just taking from those experiences to kind of be more present. And that's a theme throughout a lot of these people that have had these after death experiences. They come back, and what they've taken from it is being more present, being more in the moment, and that's really all that you can control is what you're doing and thinking and feeling right now at this moment. Doesn't really matter what you've done in the past or what could potentially happen in the future, but being present with the people that are around you and showing attention and compassion and for the people that are around you. That's really what matters.
It is. It's not the step you made yesterday or the step you will make tomorrow. It's the step you make right now.
Yeah.
That's what really matters. And
a lot of times, the step that you took today, you might take 3 more steps backwards tomorrow. Who knows?
That happens, but you have to accept that that's going to happen, and it's going to happen very often.
Yeah.
And that's what I've come to call failing forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally took that from Denzel, so I can't take credit, but you have to accept that when you do take steps back, that it does happen, but you have to keep trying to step forward.
Yeah.
And it's...
It goes along with what that lady was saying, is just continual momentum, forward momentum.
Yeah.
Whether you think it's good or bad, you're still moving.
And like you said, I also do find it funny that the people who have these experiences and they come back with this new knowledge of I have to be more present or loving, or like the dude who went to hell was, suddenly painfully self-aware of how much of a shitty person he was and decided to change. It's funny that those things happen to people who need that wake-up call, who need to be shown like, hey, what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Try this instead.
Yeah.
And then they end up changing their whole life and their whole perspective. And by telling their stories, probably change a whole other group of people's lives and perspective in kind, because now you, at least for the people who are willing to believe or be open-minded enough to understand, like, hey, this could be a very real thing, I should just take their knowledge and hope I don't have to go through the same thing.
Well, I think that, like, you hear people's stories and you're like, oh man, that's a crazy experience. And what they're saying is like, try to treat people with respect, and, don't outwardly hate people for no reason,
Yeah.
But
unless
if
it's
you really
pedophiles.
think about it,
Fuck them pedophiles.
Yeah, true. If you think about it, though, like, trying to live that way, it's not a hard thing, and it actually feels more like self-rewarding to do try to live that way.
It really does. And I think the littlest things make the biggest difference.
Yeah.
And one thing that I personally try to do, and I've always done, but I've done it a lot more in the past few years, is like, when you have an interaction with a person, just be a little extra kind. When you stop at the gas station to get an energy drink on your way to work, don't just, throw your money on the counter and don't say anything to the attendant at the convenience store. Just, hey, how's your day going? And then you check out and, have a good day. Just be a little extra kind.
Yeah.
And you're not doing it to like, oh, I'm going to buy my way into heaven or something. Just do it just because.
Yeah.
And it does make you feel good, and it makes you feel like you're a good person. Whether or not you are is up to you, but putting that little bit of extra effort out to put something better out into the universe, it will pay dividends eventually.
Yeah. I think that even doing stuff like, because I've been doing that also, strangely enough, like, especially with interactions with, like, people that are like you said, like people at the gas station or like fast food places or wherever you go. I think it kind of catches people off guard too, where they're like, the normal thing is like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
Oh, pretty good. How you doing?
Yeah.
Wait, you're just supposed to say good.
Yeah.
But like, okay, you want to engage in the conversation, I'm here for it,
Well, and you never know, especially with those jobs, how shitty of a day that person is having. Yeah. Especially the person at the fast food window has probably been yelled at and cursed out and spit on. You fucked up my order. So just having one person come through and show them like, hey, I'm still a person. I'm still worthy of being treated nicely. And this one person showed it to me, like it brightened up my day. I've never worked fast food, but I just assume it fucking sucks.
Yeah. Dealing
with people who are bitching about, I didn't get my ranch. But yeah, just showing those people a little bit of extra care and extra compassion that day may turn their whole tide. It may take what was a shitty day and make it just a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I think just putting that good out there in the universe, not even for yourself, but just to do it because the world needs more of it, is just a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, you even think about, like, you spending that extra 30 seconds or whatever to have a little bit of a conversation, and say, like, so I've gotten into conversations with people. There was one time I stopped at Jimmy John's and ended up sitting there talking to the kid that was working there for like 5 minutes about like work and like random shit.
Yeah.
And we were both like laughing and, kind of joking with each other about like having to go to work, and it was a night shift, and so I left and I'm like, hey man, have a good day. Hey, you too. Left. I felt positive, like, oh, that was funny. And I'm sure that he probably felt the same way. Like, that was weird. I've never gotten into a full conversation with somebody at the drive-thru, you know. But leaving him in a positive space and myself leaving in a positive space, I think that it was, you know, that's a good thing. It can't be a bad thing, you know.
No, and even though I do believe it gives you a little bit of extra karma points, it's still just a good thing to do. And I think just being a good person obviously doesn't come down to, like I said, like buying a ticket to heaven, but it speaks more of who you are. And you also have to look at it through the lens of these people who had these after-death experiences and what they saw and what they went through after they died. And you have to question inside yourself, what would I see? What would I be treated to? Would I be that guy who's getting butt fucked by demons? Or am I going to walk through the mist?
Yeah.
Like, which is it going to be? And it's not that I want to sway the scales in my favor, but I'm going to do what I do, knowing that it is going to help in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that's like a selfish point of view. I think that's just a realistic point of view, because I know deep down I would do those things no matter if I was going up or down. It wouldn't matter. I'm not going to change that. That's part of my personality, is to be nice to gas station attendants and people who work fast food. That's just the way I'm built. But if it does help me in the long run, fucking cool.
Yeah.
I earned a little extra because I've seen a lot of people get really shitty at people just trying to do their job.
Yeah, and it's. I know that people have bad days and like shit compounds on top of each other, and when the shit starts stacking, it stacks up quick.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, and it's easy to like target somebody that you don't know that, you know, made a minor mistake, and all of a sudden it's like everything is just coming loose on this one person for the one thing that they did wrong. But like, and I know that it's bound to happen to everybody at some point,
For sure.
multiple points in their lives, but like trying to see people for just being people and just, you know, having that attitude that nobody's out to get you.
Yeah.
And if something happens, it really was probably just a fucking error or mistake, or, you know.
Yeah, and oftentimes little things can be course corrected like that. Like, I think it was like a month ago, I was in a grocery store, and the lady in front of me trying to check out was being, what did the Navajo used to call it? Oh yeah, a cunt to the lady running the check stand. Yeah, she was just like royally terrible. And I'm going to judge on outward appearance. Like, this is a lady who does this regularly. So like, we get through the check stand, and I could see the lady working the check stand was like upset about it. Like, she was on the verge of tears. And I was just like, hey, don't listen to her. You're doing a great job. Don't sweat it. She's just a bitch.
Yeah.
And she's like, thank you, I really needed that. And I was like, you're welcome. Now scan my shit. I want to get out of here.
Now scan my shit before I lose it.
Before I get worse.
No, yeah, I think definitely, you know, trying to uplift people is a lot more self-rewarding than like being in that negative space all the time.
For sure. So, do you believe fully in reincarnation?
I believe that it's a big possibility. I'm not going to say I know for sure that it's not fact or total fiction. I do, you know, it makes sense that, you know, a lot of things that we do here on Earth, we fail at, and we have to retry to get good at something that you want to be good at.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it makes a lot of sense to have to be able to go through this trial that we go through in life multiple times to get it more right than you would just on a one run type thing. So yeah, I believe the possibility for that. You know, I believe 100% that there's life after death, that there's an existence after this mortal existence that we are experiencing here on Earth. So if reincarnation is part of that, I would totally understand that, being a thing.
I agree. I tend to have a lot of trouble believing in a lot of metaphysical theorizing, like as much as I am into like the ghost hunting and the theorizing about it and all that. I can't really say I believe in ghosts. I don't believe in almost any religious aspect of God and the devil, heaven and hell, things like that. There's a lot of it that I think is just kind of mumbo jumbo. But one thing that I will say 100% I believe in is reincarnation. And even if you look at it from a scientific point where energy cannot be created nor destroyed, that energy has to go somewhere. Just because your meat spacesuit is done for doesn't mean that your consciousness is gone. And in this day and age, consciousness has transformed. It's very different. Mm-hmm. We look at it now as AI, but who's to say we don't become AI, or AI isn't based on our consciousness, or that consciousness isn't collected in some way, shape, or form to be reused instead of just being stored. There are too many possibilities and too many different cultures across the world, across vastly different spans of time, who have the same idea and the same theology, especially these cultures that never had anything to do with each other, who were never even spatially close to each other to be able to discuss them, let alone get past their language barrier, but they all magically have the same concept of life, death, and rebirth. I think there's just too many coincidences. Like we said, so many coincidences create a pattern.
Yeah.
So there's too much there for me to say it's not true. And there's also that part of me that is hopeful that if I don't get it right now, I get another chance to get it right, and another one, so I can fail upward instead of downward. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Sure.
The spiral never ends.
Talking about that, there's I think it was on Amazon Prime, it was a show called Glitch. I think it was called Glitch. Something along those lines, but it was talking about how, like, technology is improving and how, like, a lot of your, as people are starting to get these, like, Neuralink stuff and you're more connected with AI, your consciousness kind of melds with the AI, and then, like, in the show, like, the people die, and then their consciousness just switches over and is still existing in these AI accounts that are, like, their old account, but they're still alive inside these accounts, and they start, like, possessing people. Kind of an interesting show.
That's a really cool concept.
Yeah, but it was kind of along the lines you were talking about with the AI stuff, but anyways, it was off topic a little bit, but kind of a good show. I don't know if I ever finished it, though.
I'm going to check that out. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's like that movie Transcendence with Johnny Depp.
I don't know if I've seen it.
So he's like this prevalent tech guy in the AI field, where he's developing this system that's going to have the collective intelligence of every human being that's ever lived. And he ends up getting shot by this, like, anti-AI radical person. And he lives, but he's not going to live very long. I can't remember, like, what the medical condition was. But his wife was unwilling to let go. And so she worked with a friend, and they uploaded his consciousness into this program. So, and they spent all this time, like, recording his dialogue and his movements and things like that, so it could give an actual, like, portrayal of him using the AI as, like, the spirit, the backbone. So he was the AI, but he was, I don't know, it's hard to really, like, explain it. But yeah, so his consciousness became the AI. And then he started doing all these different projects, like building these fields with satellites and things like that. And I'm just going to spoil the whole fucking movie for you. Anyway, he becomes really powerful and really strong, and he's basically in control of the worldwide network. Even though he's not doing anything with it, he has the power, and all these people want to take him down. And so his wife ends up getting like mortally wounded, and she's going to die. And he's like, "I can fix you," and she's like, "No, I'd rather just die, but I want you to shut off when I die." And so she passes away, and he shuts down the entire AI program. He like self-destructs basically, but everything he had been working on was to basically heal the world. Like, he released all these nanobots into the sky, and it fixed all the world's pollution and did all these crazy things, shut down technology as we know it, but improved the actual health of the planet and people with all these nanobots that he created. It's actually a really cool movie. I don't know why it got so much hate.
I never even heard of it.
It was a pretty good movie. But I do think that there is going to be a huge tether with our consciousness to AI. Now, if that ever happens, I don't want to be part of it, because my spiritual self is like, I would rather see what's outside of my consciousness, not just be trapped in another suit.
Yeah.
Like, I'm in this meat suit now. I don't want to be in a fucking silicone-based technology suit next. I want to go.
I also just saw a news report about how they've developed a new way to freeze and unthaw human brain tissue without damaging it.
Like while they're alive? Or just like a total stasis?
Total stasis. But they've just been working with like bits of brain tissue. And because the big problem was that when they would freeze a brain, kind of like you're putting your brain on ice to reincarnate yourself later on when there's technology that can do it. Problem with that has been like the moisture inside your brain would freeze into crystals, and then like as you thaw back out, the crystals melt and kind of dissolve the brain particles. But now they've developed some new technique in where they are able to do it without damaging the brain tissue. So
your brain is actually more like if you took a streamer and unraveled it and coiled it over onto itself. That's more what your brain's like. It's not a solid mass.
Oh yeah.
So there's a big misconception. It's when you see like a scientist or whatever holding a brain, it's treated with chemicals to keep it together.
Yeah.
So inside your skull, it's the fluid that's keeping it compacted together. So when you get like a concussion or something like that, it's parts of your brain is actually opening up and separating. And I think freezing your brain would cause a lot of those issues because you're going to freeze the fluid in between all the folds.
Yeah, I've in animals that I killed a deer and like cut its antlers off, and I had to like saw through the head. But yeah, I like took out the brain and was just looking at it like, oh, this is such a weird fucking. It's just like goop.
Yeah.
With like kind of like more like harder bits, but not hard, but like almost
denser.
Rubbery, denser, denser bits, and then a lot of it's just like kind of
mush.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, it's kind of like really runny oatmeal or something. I don't know if you've ever like felt brain matter before, a brain before.
I'm so fucking squeamish, I'd probably just puke.
Yeah. So I killed this deer and like gutted it, cleaned it out, butchered it, and then had the head and was like trying to take. And so I just got a fucking saw and started sawing through the skull with the saw. 16-year-old kid cutting up this deer's head in my front yard. But fascinating to get to see the insides and kind of handle that material. Never want to do it again, but
yeah. I imagine there's a little bit of that goes with it.
Yeah. kept on like feeling it, and you'd hit one of those chunks like. I'm just glad that it was. I think it was like late November when I was taking this head apart. I killed the deer in October or whatever, and had this head, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with it, and then started cutting it open. But it was cold outside, so I didn't have the like any kind of smell or anything like that. I think that
Thankful.
helped a lot. Yeah.
That's why I like to call it thinking meat.
Yeah.
'Cause it's just a big mass of meat.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's such a weird. It's just a really weird texture.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say it's even. It's more like gel or something.
Yeah.
Slimy or like slime.
Not consistent whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like a poop after a night of drinking, but you ate pizza.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we'll pull this one in. Side note, if anybody wants to talk to me or Spence about your past life regression or reincarnation, we're down.
Or after death experience.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever known anybody who's died and came back.
I do know somebody, but we can talk about that after.
Sounds good. No, this is a good one.
Yeah.
All right.
Really good.
I love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.